In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. Okay, was, is, and always shall be for the new year. I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about the holy water service that we're going to, it's on this side here, the Ayasmo service, the blessing of the waters, and to just bring up a side note. And for those who were in the Bible study last month, I mentioned this a little bit, but I wanted to bring up a side note about something that happened when Christ descended into the water. So we have the flow of the water in the Jordan River, and the hymnology of the church and the writings and the prayers that you're going to hear in a little bit speak about when Christ descends into the water, that there's this light from on high, the voice from heaven, the submission of Christ to St. John to be baptized, but there's something that happens to the actual water itself. And the hymns and the writings of the church say that the water, when it encountered God, went a different direction. So the water of the Jordan, it said, that not only did Christ descend into the water, but the water itself responded to the presence of Christ. And that response, we see, of the water becomes transforming for that water too. So those who went into the water after the baptism of Christ were healed of their diseases, which is why we see people, when they go to the Holy Lands, will go into the Jordan River, and they will be submersed into the water, not as a rebaptism, because we don't have that in our understanding of theology, but as a pilgrimage, as a chance to descend into the water, to remember that those waters were healing not only at the time of Christ, but also to remember too that when we are baptized, that water is for our healing as well. So it wasn't just the water at the time of Christ, but we ask for that water to be a water of sanctification, of cleansing, the lifting of bonds, of fetters, for the healing of the soul and of the body, and all these beautiful prayers that we will hear again as we bless the holy water today. But I wanted to just give you an insight to the reality of creation. We are alive, we're moving, we understand how we are, we're beings, we speak, we understand, but we think of other things as dead, as just created but not actually alive. And you have to understand that everything that God created is living. Now you might say, well, how is that? How is it living? Well, we have the marble on the columns. Is marble a living thing? Is stone a living thing? Well, for anyone who's been to a volcano, you understand a volcano is alive, right? It's a living thing that's in the earth where rock is melted and moves. It's not just a stagnant thing. We see that sandstone shifts, and we hear the plates, and we see that the mountains are the way they are. We see the valleys and all these different areas of the earth that change. The earth itself, if we're not in California, but if we were in California, you might be in church and see the chandeliers start swinging here and there and feel a little rumble. And when I was in Boston at the seminary, they said there's actually over 1,000 earthquakes in Boston a year, but they're very tiny. They're very small earthquakes, and we don't typically feel them. But the earth itself, if you go to its core, is moving, is alive. Trees, the pews that you sit in, were once living things, living creatures, if you want to call it that. Living creation of God. And we see that water itself, in this context of the service of the blessing of the waters, we see that the water itself is understanding the master. Just like the animals, and as I explained at the Nativity, came to the birth of Christ, and as it's said in Isaiah, the first chapter, verse 3, that the ox and the donkey know the master, but people don't. We see that when Christ was crucified, what happened? The sun was darkened. The earth shook. The curtain of the temple was torn in two. There was reaction by creation. And everything, we have to understand, is created. That's why our patriarch is so in favor of being, or he's called the Green Patriarch, but he's in favor of saving the earth, or being good stewards of the earth, I should say, because it is created being. It is a created thing that God made. But we see that God takes us as his pinnacle of creation and speaks to us. He becomes like us to save us. But he also teaches us through the things that we can dismiss. We throw wood into the fire to keep warm. We dispose many times of things that were created for us, not only to help us and to keep us alive, but we also use them as tools. Just as the wood that you use in a fire to keep you warm or to cook your food, or the animal that was created that you ate. Wood can also be used as pews in a church, the walls of a church, or the back of an icon. So everything can be used as a tool, and Christ uses, God himself uses water as a tool to show creation, us, that this baptism of Christ is critical for us. Why is it critical for us? Because we die with Christ and we resurrect with him. That's what when we're baptized in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity, we die with Christ, we resurrect with Christ. And then we receive the Holy Spirit at chrismation. So these are things to understand, and when you look around at everything that you see in the world, the sun, the world, the universe itself is a moving, living thing. And we know that. Scientists know that. But we can't dismiss the signs that God used in creation that we overlook to teach us about him. He uses everything, every tool. He uses the mouth of the prophets. He uses the words of the evangelists and the apostles that go out and preach and teach. And he also uses the signs around us. The sun, the moon, the stars. He used the star to guide those who worship the stars to worship Christ. So think about these things and think of these events. And when you hear the prayer today, when we read the prayers for the Epiphany service, I want you to listen to the phrase where it says, "The waters saw you, O Lord. The waters saw you and were afraid. The Jordan turned back in fear and moved back and became the source of healing and sanctification." So we see many times in the baptismal icon of Christ, we'll see at the bottom, we'll see like two little men riding a fish or a whale in the bottom. And one says thalassa and the other says river. So one says sea and one says river. And that's to show the personification of the sea and the river, that the water is actually moving. It's alive. And Christ, by his presence, makes everything that we would think inanimate, animate, moving, alive, teaching us and speaking to us. So look around and think that the tree that you sit on today goes all the way back to the first lesson that we learned, the first lesson in the book of Genesis, that Christ is, or God speaks and says, "Do not eat from the fruit of this tree." And then what does he do? He uses the tree to hang on, to be crucified. He uses wood again to teach us that by taking that original sin that happened from the tree, transforming the tree into the worst form of torture, and then using it as the tool and the symbol that we wear around our necks, that we make the sign of the cross, that wood becomes transforming. So everything in creation, God transforms. But the pinnacle of that transformation has to be us. So as you listen to the prayers today and you think of the blessing of the Jordan and this beautiful feast day of Epiphany Eve that we have today and then tomorrow, think of how God has given you tools, signs, lessons to make you better, to make us the transformed beyond anything else. Because everything else is underneath us. And he uses everything underneath us to bring us in his embrace. May he do that this day, on this Epiphany Day, and always. Amen. Opus Hippocratus upanate philatomnis idoxanan apembomen, to patrice tu ioc et tu pneumatin inciai, que Jesus eonas ton eonon.